So good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start with our English class today. Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Okay. So am I audible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So today we are going to start with our poetry and prose. क्योंकि English literature paper में poetry and prose it covers a larger portion. All right, because it is the easier portion for you. Obviously, the poetry and the stories, it's easier than Shakespeare, right? So we are
Yes,
going
ma'am.
to
Yes,
start with the story An Angel in Disguise, and the second one is a poem, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. An Angel in Disguise is written by our author T.S. Arthur, and second, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, it's a poem by Maya Angelou. Okay. An Angel in Disguise. We're going to start with it first. By T.S. Arthur. So I'm going to explain you the entire chapter, all right, in some time only, and then I'll give you the question answers, the MCQs, especially of your workbook, the Morning Star, all right, because in the ICSE papers, the 60% of the portion is covered from the workbooks. So I will send you the answers of each and every question. Also, I'll give you some extra question answers that will be sent to you in the group, and from tomorrow when the class will start, we are even going to discuss the question answers. All right, so everyone has to study it. So starting with the chapter, An Angel in Disguise by T.S. Arthur. Idleness, vice, and intemperance had done the miserable work, and the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wrecked children. So idleness, vice, and intemperance had done the miserable work. Means that she was idle. Means nobody used to, in the entire village, nobody used to talk to her. Everybody used to mock her. So she was very alone. All right. So she was a lady. She had 3 children in the story. And she was mocked by everybody in the village, and so she was very idle, means she was very alone. And the dead mother lay cold and still amid her wrecked children. The dead mother, now in the starting only we get it that the mother was dead. All right. So now the mother has died, and obviously she is laying still amid her wrecked children. Wrecked children means the very, miserable children. All right, the poor, miserable children, they were sitting beside their dead mother. She had fallen upon the threshold of her own door in a drunken fit and died in the presence of her frightened little ones. Means on the threshold of her own door, means the door, all right, the door of her house, अपने घर के ही दरवाजे पे, she had fallen down over the threshold and she had died. और उनकी डेथ हो गई थी, and she was in a drunken fit, means she was drunk. तो नशे में गिर के उनकी डेथ हो गई थी basically. Death touches the spring of our common humanity. This woman had been despised, scoffed at, and angrily denounced by nearly every man, woman, and child in the village. Now, this woman had been despised, scoffed at, and angrily denounced. Means that she was, left aside. She was mocked at, she was scoffed at, means everybody used to say bad things to her. Everybody used to speak bad about her. Nobody liked to talk to her, and angrily denounced. Again, the same thing, that she was spoken bad by the people. ठीक है, उसको बहुत बुरा भला बोलते थे उसके जो गांव के लोग थे. From every man, woman, and child in the village. But now, as the fact of her death was passed from lip to lip, in subdued tones, pity which took the place of anger and sorrow of denunciation. तो अभी तक क्या था कि अभी तक लोग गुस्सा करते थे उसके ऊपर, ठीक है, उसको बुरा भला बोलते थे, बट नाउ इट हैड टेकन द प्लेस ऑफ पिटी. पिटी मीन्स दया भाव किसी के प्रति, ठीक है. सो वो जो गुस्सा था वो पिटी में चेंज हो गया था, एंड सॉरो ऑफ डेनंसिएशन, और मतलब जो एक बुरा भला जो बोलने का एक जो डेनंसिएशन, मतलब कि जो एक किसी को नीचा दिखाने का जो एक वो था, जो नीचा दिखाते थे, ठीक है ना, उस लेडी को, उसके गांव वाले, वो अब सॉरो में चेंज हो गया था. मतलब दे वर ऑल फीलिंग सैड फॉर हर. ओके. Neighbors went hastily to the old tumble-down hut in which she had secured little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter cold. Now all the neighbors, मतलब उसके आसपास के गांव के जितने भी लोग थे, they all had went down to the old tumble-down hut. Means tumble-down hut means किसी गरीब, a very poor person, ठीक है, तो उसके घर में they all went after her death. हम whenever there's a death in our house, सारे आसपास के जो neighbors होते हैं, all our relatives, they come to see us, right, in our last rites. So similarly, in which she had secured little more than a place of shelter from summer heats and winter cold. मतलब जहाँ पे वो obviously छोटा सा हट था, घर था, जो कि उनको बचाता था किस चीज से, समर हीट से और विंटर कोल्ड से, ठीक है, गर्मियों में हीट से, धूप से, और विंटर्स में ठंडक से बचाता था ना. उसके अलावा शी हैड सिक्योर्ड अ लिटिल मोर. सिक्योर्ड अ लिटिल मोर मीन्स उसके अलावा उन्होंने वहां पे कुछ और चीजें बचा के अपने लिए रखी हुई थी, जैसे कि वी कैन से फूड, क्लोथ्स, विच इज टोल्ड आफ्टर दिस. Now see some with grave clothes for a decent interment of the body. So now what were the things which were saved? Some with grave clothes for the decent interment of the body. मतलब कि the grave clothes, मतलब कुछ साफ सुथरे कपड़े रखे हुए थे जिससे there could be decent interment, मतलब कि जो last rituals होते हैं, ठीक है ना, जब किसी की डेथ हो जाती है तो उसके बाद जो last rituals होते हैं इंसान के, वो फॉलो हो सके, ठीक है. So some of the clothes which could be, which could be which she can wear, and some with food for the half starving children. And there was some food, मतलब कि वो जो बच्चे थे, she had 3 children, so there was some food which they can eat. half starving children मतलब they were already half starving, मतलब उनको already enough खाना नहीं मिला हुआ था, वो भी already भूखे थे. starving means भूख. 3 in number. So how many children were there? Total 3. Of these, John the oldest, a boy of 12, was a stout lad able to earn his living with any farmer. So now the description of the 3 children. So the first one was John. John was the oldest child, ठीक है, सबसे बड़ा लड़का था घर का, the oldest, and he was a boy of 12. This is very important, you can mark it in your books. John the oldest, a boy of 12, was a stout lad able to earn his living with any farmer. Stout means a very fat person, you can say. Alright, so he was a fat boy and he can easily live and earn a living with any farmer. मतलब he can work with any farmer, किसी भी farmer के साथ काम करके अपना रोजी रोटी कमा सकता था, ठीक. Now after this, Kate, between 10 and 11, was bright, active girl out of whom something clever might be made if in good hands. Then the second child, the first one was John, the oldest boy of 12. The second child was Kate. Alright, she was a girl between 10 and 11. Her age was between 10 and 11 and she was a very active and a bright girl. ठीक है, and if she could get into good hands, मतलब अगर वो किसी अच्छे इंसान के साथ रहती है या किसी अच्छे इंसान को मिलती है, तो she was very bright and she can do something well in her future. So again, this is also important. The entire description of the 3 children is important. But poor little Maggie, the youngest, was hopelessly diseased. 2 years before, a fall from a window had injured her spine and she had not been able to leave her bed since, except when lifted in the arms of her mother. So now the third child was Maggie. Okay, and Maggie was the youngest child. She was hopelessly diseased. Alright, means she had caught some disease. मतलब उसको कुछ problem थी जिसकी वजह से वो कभी उठ नहीं पाती थी. अब problem क्या थी? 2 years before a fall from a window, means 2 साल पहले she had fallen down from a window. ठीक है, एक window से वो गिर गई थी when she was when she might have been obviously smaller. Had injured her spine and she had not been able to leave her bed since. तो अब when she had fallen down from the window, तो उसके बाद से ही she had injured her spine, मतलब उसके spine में चोट लग गई थी जिसके बाद से वो अपने बिस्तर से नहीं उठ पाती थी. मतलब she used to lay down on her bed and वो उठ ही नहीं पाती थी, except when lifted in the arms of her mother. So whenever she has to get up, whenever she has to go anywhere, her mother, she used to lift her up in her arms. Okay, so this is the description. This is very important. A number of questions could be made out of here. One important question which could be made is simply to give a description of the children. Alright, so you have to write from that there were 3 in number, and from here till here the entire answer will be made. So now what the question that arose between the villagers was that what is to be done with the children. Okay, which basically means that now obviously the mother is dead. There are 3 children. Alright, so what is to be done with them? So this was the question that was arising between the villagers, among the villagers. What is to be done with the children? That was the chief question now. The dead mother would go underground and be forever beyond all care or concern of the villagers. But the children must not be left to starve. So now the matter was कि बच्चों के साथ क्या करना? What is to be done with the children? क्योंकि mother की तो death हो गई, now she will go underground. She has no concern with anybody. But now what about the children? We cannot leave the children to starve. हम बच्चों को भूखा मरने के लिए नहीं छोड़ सकते. Okay? So after considering the matter and talking it over with his wife, Farmer Jones said that he would take John and do well with him, now that his mother was out of the way. So now, अब क्या हुआ that after considering the matter, अब जो Farmer Jones थे, तो Farmer Jones ने अपनी wife के साथ बात करी. हम लोगों ने अभी just पढ़ा था that John was the eldest son and he can do well with any farmer. Alright, he can earn a living. So the farmer was Farmer Jones. ठीक है, and Farmer Jones ने decide करा कि वो John को ले जाएगा, that he will keep John with him and do well with him. मतलब कि John उनकी farming में help करेगा and वो John को 2 वक्त का खाना देंगे और रहने के लिए जगह देंगे. तो John, who took John along with him? It was Farmer Jones. Okay. And Mrs. Ellis, who had been looking out for a bound girl, concluded that it would be charitable in her to make choice of Katie, even though she was too young to be of much use for several years. So now Mrs. Ellis, Katie, the second child between 10 and 11, उनको कौन लेके गया? Mrs. Ellis. Mrs. Ellis was already looking for a bound girl. मतलब कोई ऐसी लड़की जो उनके घर में उनके काम काज में हेल्प कर सके. ठीक है, who could help her in her household works. So for that she chose Katie. She said that Katie was too young. Alright, कि अभी Katie बहुत छोटी है और उससे हम जो है इतना काम करवा नहीं सकते, इतना हेल्प ले नहीं सकते. But still she will take Katie and alright, she will make good use of her. I could do much better, I know, said Mrs. Ellis. But as no one seems inclined to take her, I must act from a sense of duty, expect to have trouble with the child. For she is an undisciplined thing, used to having her own way. So now Mrs. Ellis says that I know I can get much better. ठीक है, मुझे पता है कि मुझे इससे बहुत बेटर कोई मिल सकता है, बट एज अ सेंस ऑफ ड्यूटी कोई जो है कैटी को ले जाने के लिए तैयार नहीं है, इसलिए मैं कैटी को लेके जाऊंगी। एंड आई नो दैट आई विल हैव ट्रबल विद द चाइल्ड, ठीक है, मुझे पता है कि मुझे उस बच्ची के साथ परेशानियां होंगी, बिकॉज शी इज अ वेरी अनडिसिप्लिन्ड चाइल्ड, ऑलराइट, एंड शी इज यूज्ड टू हैविंग हर ओन वे, मीन्स कि वो बहुत अनडिसिप्लिन्ड है, किसी की सुनती नहीं है, अपनी चीजें अपने हिसाब से करती है. So, but still, so means she says that I'm doing a favor taking Catty. Basically, she wants to speak from all this that I can get something better, but still I'm taking her. So, I'm doing a favor taking Catty with me. You have to remember who took John, Farmer Jones, and who took Catty, Mrs. Ellis. And किस काम के लिए? Because John is going to help Farmer Jones, all right, in the farming and everything, and Mrs. Ellis, she was looking for a bound girl, and so she chose Katie. But no one said I'll take Maggie. But किसी ने ये नहीं बोला कि मैं मैगी को लेके जाऊंगा. Why? Because अगर कोई मैगी को लेके जाता तो वो किसी के काम नहीं आ सकती थी. She was of no use basically, right? Because she was bedridden. ठीक है, वो बिस्तर पे पड़ी रहती थी. Her spine was injured. वो किसी भी काम की नहीं थी. इस वजह से किसी ने भी nobody agreed to take Maggie along with them. Pitying glances were cast on her wan and wasted form, and thoughts were troubled on her account. So now everybody was looking at her from, with pity, means with in a miserable way, in sorrow. मतलब बहुत दुख हो रहा है, ठीक है, सब उसको इस तरह से देख रहे थे, ऐसे उसको देख के बहुत दुख हो रहा है, समझ नहीं आ रहा है कि बच्चे के साथ क्या करना चाहिए. On a wan and wasted form means on the condition she was in, means in a very bad and a very poor condition. Mothers brought cast of garments and removing her soiled and ragged clothes, dressed her in clean attire. So the mothers who used to live nearby, the neighbors, तो वो अपने बच्चों के कास्ट ऑफ क्लोथ्स, मतलब जो पुराने कपड़े होते थे थोड़े से, वो लेकर के आए, और उसके जो गंदे कपड़े होते थे, ragged and soiled clothes, उनको जो है she dressed in clean attire, मतलब मदर्स ने वो कपड़े चेंज कर दिए और साफ कपड़े. So booj on those who adopt Maggie. Okay, act as a boj. Right, you're correct. Yes, you're correct. कि मैगी को जो भी adopt करता, Ayush, you are saying it correct. I hope you've written this boj only. Okay, so it's correct that Maggie is acting as a boj basically, right? अगर कोई भी मैगी को लेकर के जाता तो वो उनके लिए बोझ रहती, right? वो कुछ भी काम नहीं कर सकती थी क्योंकि वो तो बिस्तर पे ही पड़ी हुई थी. Mothers brought cast of garments and removing her soiled and ragged clothes dressed her in clean attire. मतलब आसपास के जो नेबर्स थे उसमें मदर्स अपने बच्चों के पुराने कपड़े लेकर के आई और उनको जो है पुराने कपड़े, मतलब द क्लोथ्स विच शी वाज वेयरिंग दे वर ऑल रैगेड, फटे फूटे गंदे कपड़े थे, तो उनको चेंज करके उसको साफ क्लीन अटायर में ड्रेस करा. The sad eyes and patient face of the little one touched many hearts and even knocked at them for entrance. तो अब क्या हुआ कि जो the sad eyes and the patient face means Maggie, she was a very little girl. अभी छोटी थी, obviously she was the youngest of all the three brothers and sisters. So she had those eyes, the sad eyes. Obviously her mother had died. Obviously she was on the bed. Who is going to take care of her? So she was sad. So the sad eyes and the patient face, it had touched many hearts. मतलब बहुत सारे लोगों का दिल जो है वो छू रही थी उसकी आंखें उसको देख करके. They were all feeling pity for her, but nobody actually wanted to take her. Nobody knocked for the entrance. But none opened to take her in who wanted a bedridden child. But कोई भी उसको अडॉप्ट नहीं करना चाहा, क्योंकि किसी को भी अपने ऊपर बोझ नहीं चाहिए था, किसी को भी एक बेड रिटन, एक बेड पे पड़ा हुआ बच्चा नहीं चाहिए था जो कि किसी काम का ना। Take her to the poor house, said a rough man of whom the question, "What's to be done with Maggie?" was asked. "Nobody is going to be bothered with her." So now there was a rough man. A rough man means somebody who is, who doesn't has a very nice heart. कोई बहुत मतलब ठीक है, बस एकदम बहुत लीनियंट सा इंसान है कि भाई ठीक है रफा दफा करो बस हटा करके उसको। तो he said, take her to the poor house. पुअर हाउस मीन्स जहाँ पे अनाथ बच्चे रहते हैं, अनाथ आश्रम, ठीक है। सो ही सेड कि टेक हर टू द पुअर हाउस, व्हाट्स टू बी डन विद मैगी वाज आस्क्ड, जिससे तो वो जो मैन था उससे पूछा गया कि मैगी के साथ क्या करना चाहिए, तो उसने कहा कि टेक हर टू द पुअर हाउस, ठीक है, उसको अनाथ आश्रम में छोड़ दो, नोबडी इज गोइंग टू बी बॉदर्ड विद हर, कोई भी उसका बोझ नहीं उठाएगा, कोई भी उसके लिए परेशान नहीं होगा। The poor house is a sad place for a sick and helpless child, answered one. तो उसी भीड़ में से एक इंसान ने बोला कि लेकिन अब पुअर हाउस, एक अनाथ आश्रम, एक सिक और हेल्पलेस चाइल्ड के लिए So the poor house, मतलब one of them answered that the poor house, it's a very sad place for a sick and helpless child, ठीक है, कि मतलब एक बीमार, एक बेचारे बच्चे के लिए जो कि कुछ कर नहीं सकता है खुद से, उसके लिए जो है एक अनाथ आश्रम बहुत बुरी जगह है। For your child or mine, said the other, lightly speaking, but for this brat it will prove a blessed change. She will be kept clean, have healthy food and be doctored, which is more than can be said of a past condition. तो अब उसी में से एक इंसान बोलता है कि आपके या मेरे बच्चे के लिए एक अनाथ आश्रम बुरी जगह हो सकता है, ठीक है, बट फॉर दिस गर्ल हु हैज बीन केप्ट, हु हैज बीन स्टार्विंग, ठीक है, जिसको सही से खाना नहीं मिलता था आज तक, जो कि जिसको ढंग के कपड़े नहीं मिले, जिसने फटे हुए कपड़े पहने, जिसको साफ कपड़े नहीं मिले आज तक, डॉक्टर असिस्टेंस नहीं मिली आज तक, उसके लिए तो वो हेवन हो जाएगा, क्योंकि वहां पे क्या होगा, दैट शी विल इवन बी केप्ट क्लीन, ठीक है, वहां पे वो नहला धुला के अच्छे कपड़े पहना के रखी जाएगी, हेल्दी खाना मिलेगा, ठीक है, शी वोंट स्टार्व, बी डॉक्टर्ड, ठीक है, और डॉक्टर असिस्टेंस मिलेगी, डॉक्टर की असिस्टेंस मिलेगी, वहां पे जो भी इसको दिक्कत है डॉक्टर देखने आएंगे, तो इसके लिए तो वो हेवन है। There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy him. The day following the day of death was made the day of burial. A few neighbors were at the miserable hovel, but none followed dead cart, as it bore the unhonored remains to its pauper grave. So now, the reason, obviously, if we see, so for a child like Maggie, who wasn't given anything in her life till date, if she will be kept better than the condition she was in earlier, even if she goes to the poor house, but still it didn't satisfy because nobody wanted to take it over the heads. The day following the day of death, मतलब जिस दिन डेथ हुई उसके अगले दिन, it was the day of burial, ठीक है, उनकी मदर को दफनाने के लिए जा रहे थे, तो उसी टाइम पे क्या हुआ, दैट देयर वाज अ मिजरेबल हॉवल, मतलब कि कुछ नेबर्स को बहुत बुरा लग रहा था, रो रहे थे, लेकिन किसी ने भी वो डेड कार्ड को फॉलो नहीं करा, मतलब लेके गए और कोई भी उनके साथ गया नहीं वहां तक। वाई? बिकॉज as it bore the unhonored remains to its pauper grave. Pauper means a very poor person, ठीक है, तो किसी ने भी उस कार्ड को फॉलो क्यों नहीं करा, क्योंकि वो एक बहुत गरीब इंसान की ग्रेव तक जा रहा था। Basically, the author wants to say this, that nobody followed the unhonored remains. Unhonored remains, why? Because she wasn't honored in the village. उनका कोई नाम नहीं था, सब बुरा भला ही बोलते थे, कोई इज्जत नहीं थी एक तरह से, तो it was the unhonored remains and they were taking it to a pauper grave, मतलब एक गरीब की ग्रेव तक लेके जा रहे थे, इस वजह से किसी ने फॉलो नहीं करा। Farmer Jones, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away, satisfied that he had done his part. तो फार्मर जोन्स, ठीक है, जब कॉफिन चला गया तो उस टाइम पे फार्मर जोन्स ने जॉन को अपनी वेगन में बिठाया, मतलब उनकी जो भी वेगन थी जिसमें वो लेके जाते थे सब, तो वहां पे बिठाया, एंड ही ड्रोव अवे satisfied that he had done his part. भाई फार्मर जोन्स ने बोला कि ठीक है चलो मैंने अपना पार्ट तो कर दिया, जो अच्छा था, मैंने वो करके खत्म कर दिया है. Mrs. Ellis spoke to Kate with a hurried air, bid your sister goodbye, and drew the tearful children apart, ere scarcely their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. So now, तो फिर उसी टाइम पे मिसेस एलिस ने भी बोला केट से ना हरिड है, मतलब जल्दी जल्दी उन्होंने बोला कि चलो चलो अपनी सिस्टर को जल्दी से अब गुड बाय बोलो और चलो मेरे साथ. तो उसी टाइम पे the sisters, they were, you know, saying goodbye to each other, they were kissing each other, and the lips had just touched when she had taken away the sister, Kate, the child. Hastily others went out, some glancing at Maggie and some resolutely refraining from a look, until all had gone. She was alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off with the rest, "It's a cruel thing to leave her so." So now what happened कि वहाँ पे जितनी भी भीड़ लगी हुई थी, जितने भी नेबर्स जितने भी लगवाए थे, सब लोग चले गए. ठीक है, तो कुछ जो है मैगी को बड़ी भाई मतलब पिटी, बड़ी मिजरेबल नजरों से देखते हुए जा रहे थे, और कुछ ने क्या करा, दैट दे वर रिफ्रेनिंग फ्रॉम अ लुक, और कुछ कुछ अपनी नजरें चुरा रहे थे. ठीक है, वो मैगी की तरफ देखना नहीं चाह रहे थे. Until all had gone. She was alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off with the rest. तो उसी टाइम पे क्या हुआ कि जो थॉम्सन, ठीक है, was a wheelwright, उसने अपनी वाइफ अनसेट, और उसने ब्लैकस्मिथ की वाइफ से बोला. ठीक है, ब्लैकस्मिथ की वाइफ भी और लोगों के साथ वापस जा रही थी. तो उसी टाइम पे जो थॉम्सन, जो कि एक व्हीलराइट था, उसने मुड़ के उनसे बोला, इट्स अ क्रूअल थिंग टू लीव हर सो, मतलब उसको इस तरह से अकेले छोड़ देना, इट्स वेरी बैड. Then take her to the poor house, she'll have to go there, answered the blacksmith's wife, springing away and leaving Joe behind. तो तभी वो बोलती है ब्लैकस्मिथ की वाइफ जो थॉम्सन से कि अच्छा तो फिर उसको पुअर हाउस ले जाओ, अनाथ आश्रम चल ले जाओ. ठीक है, उसको तो वहां जाना ही पड़ेगा. For a little while the man stood with a puzzled air. Then he turned back and went into the hovel again. Maggie, with painful effort, had raised herself to an upright position and was sitting on the bed, straining her eyes upon the door out of which all had just departed. A vague terror had come into her thin white face. So means now the little man, he stood with a puzzled air. All right, who was the little man? Who is the little man we are talking about here? Anybody will tell?
Ma'am, Joe Thompson.
Very good. So the little man they're talking about is Joe Thompson. So Joe Thompson was a little man. So he just stood there ki what he should do. Alright, what he should do of Maggie, he should leave with everybody else, or he should take her to the poor house, or either he should take her with himself. So then he turned back. ठीक है, he went to the hovel again where Maggie was sitting. Maggie बड़े painful efforts करके थोड़ा straight होकर के she was sitting. ठीक है, she was taking, she had raised herself to an upright position, means she was sitting up straight, and she was looking at the door. And now from the door everybody had gone. She was there alone and there was some terror on her face. मतलब एक अजीब सा डर था उसके face पे अब कि what will happen with her. Oh, Mr. Thompson, she cried out, catching her suspended breath. Don't leave me here all alone. So when she looked at Mr. Thompson, she just said to him कि Mr. Thompson, please don't leave me alone here. Please मुझे यहाँ पे अकेले छोड़ के मत जाइए. Though rough in exterior, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart, and it was very tender in some places. He liked children and was pleased to have them come to his shop, where sleds and wagons were made or mended for the village lads without a draft on their hoarded sixpences. Alright, so now Joe Thompson, he used to look very rough on the exterior. ठीक है, वैसे बहुत मतलब एक cruel, एक बहुत खराब इंसान लगता था, but actual में he had a heart which was soft at certain places, and one such reason for the one such place where his heart was soft enough was for the children. बच्चों के लिए उसका दिल बहुत नरम था. and he also used to like कि जब बच्चे उनकी shop पे आते थे. Okay? No dear, he answered in a kind voice, going to the bed and stooping down over the child. You shouldn't be left here alone. Then he wrapped her with the gentleness almost of a woman in the clean bed clothes which some neighbor had brought, and lifting her in his strong arms, bore her out into the air and across the field that lay between the hovel and his home. So now what happened is that he said in a very kind voice that, okay, you won't be left here alone, and he took Maggie along with him. Okay, so how he took her, this could also be a question. So he wrapped Maggie with the gentleness almost of a woman in the clean bed clothes which some neighbor had brought, and lifting her in his strong arms, bore her out into the air and across the field that lay between the hovel and his home. Means what he did, that he lifted Maggie up in his arms. Okay, Maggie was in his arms, and then he took her. There was a field in between. There was a field in between his home and the hovel where Maggie was kept, and so he took Maggie from the hovel to his home. Now, Joe Thompson's wife, who happened to be childless, was not a woman of saintly temper, nor much given to self-denial for others' good, and Joe had well-grounded doubts touching the manner of greeting he should receive on his arrival. So now, if we talk about Joe Thompson's wife was a childless woman. Means Joe Thompson and his wife, Mrs. Thompson, they had no children. All right. Was not a woman of saintly temper, nor much given to self-denial for others' good. Means if we talk about his wife, then she was a woman of saintly temper. Means she was, you know, she was a very angry person, you can say. All right, she had a very bad temper. She used to get angry on very small issues. And we can, nor much given to self-denial for others' good, means that if we talk about that, we cannot even deny that she wasn't much involved for others' goods. मतलब दूसरों की भलाई हो जाए, ऐसी चीज़ों में वो कभी involved नहीं रहती थी. वो दूसरों की भलाई के बारे में नहीं सोचती थी. And Joe had well-grounded doubts touching the manner of greeting he should receive on his arrival. And Joe को पता था कि जब वो मतलब देखेंगे जो मैगी को लेकर के आया है, तो उनके अराइवल पे उनकी वाइफ का किस टाइप का रिएक्शन आने वाला है. He had some idea about it. Mrs. Thompson saw him approaching from the window and with ruffling feathers met him a few paces from the door as he opened the garden gate and came in. So now Mrs. Thompson saw him approaching. Mrs. Thompson ने उनको Mr. Thompson और मैगी को आते हुए विंडो से ही देख लिया था. And with ruffling feathers met him a few paces from the door as he opened the garden gate and came in. So as he opened the garden gate, जैसे ही वो garden gate खोल करके अंदर आए, वैसे ही जो है वो अपने डोर पे उनको मिल गई. He bore a precious burden and he felt it to be so. This word is very important. All right, precious burden. So a question could be how Maggie was a precious burden. You will know the answer further in the story. And he felt it to be so. As his arms held the sick child to his breast, a sphere of tenderness went out from her and penetrated his feelings. A bond had already corded itself around them both, and love was springing into life. So now she was a precious burden for Mr. Joe Thompson because he was holding the child, all right, close to his chest, and he felt as if there were the exchange of feelings between a child and a father. So the similar exchange of feelings he could feel between him and Maggie. What have you there? Sharply questioned Mrs. Thompson. Means what have you there? Means kya hai? What is this? Why have you got Maggie there? Joe felt the child start and shrink against him. He did not reply except by a look that was pleading and cautionary that said, "Wait a moment for explanations and be gentle." And passing in, carried Maggie to the small chamber on the first floor and laid her on a bed. Then, stepping back, he shut the door and stood face to face with his vinegar-tempered wife in the passageway outside. So he felt as if the child is a bit afraid. Okay, and she was shrinking. So what happened? She felt the child start and shrink against him. He felt, Joe. He did not reply. He did not reply to his wife. He said that, wait, first let me go and, just put Maggie where she should be. Means, he said, I plead. ठीक है, मैं आपसे please, that he was saying that please let me take Maggie inside. Alright, let me place her to the bed. Let me put her on the bed. And then we can have a conversation over this. So he said that wait for a moment for the explanations and be gentle. Be gentle. अभी चिल्लाने की बिल्कुल भी ज़रूरत नहीं है. And wait for the explanations. ठीक है? Then he went to the first floor. वहाँ पे एक small chamber. He carried Maggie there and he laid her on the bed. Then stepping back, he shut the door and stood face to face with his vinegar-tempered wife in the passageway outside. और जैसे ही वो बाहर निकले, दरवाजा उन्होंने बंद करा, वैसे ही वहाँ पे पैसेज में उनकी वाइफ दिख गई. ठीक है? And he was standing face to face with his wife. You haven't brought home that sick brat. Anger and astonishment were in the tones of Mrs. Joe Thompson. Her face was in a flame. Means she was very angry. Her face was in a flame. There was astonishment in the tones, anger in the tone of Mrs. Thompson. मतलब she was very angry, बहुत ज़्यादा गुस्से में, उनके face से, उनकी शक्ल से, उनकी आवाज़ से, उनकी बात से ये चीज़ पता चल रहा था. And she said, "You haven't brought home that sick brat." Alright, क्या तुम घर लेके आए हो उसको? Give me a minute. Alright, I'm coming. I'll just have water. I think women's hearts are sometimes very hard, said Joe. Usually, Joe Thompson got out of his wife's way or kept rigidly silent and non-combative when she fired up on any subject. It was with some surprise, therefore, that she now encountered a firmly set countenance and a resolute pair of eyes. So now, I think women's hearts are sometimes very hard, said Joe. तो जो ने अपनी वाइफ को रिप्लाई करा कि कभी कभी फीमेल्स का, वुमेन्स का हार्ट भी इट्स वेरी हार्ड. मतलब फीमेल्स भी बहुत फीमेल्स भी बहुत पत्थर दिल होती हैं. ठीक है? Usually Joe Thompson got out of his wife's way or kept rigidly silent and non-combative when she fired up on any subject. Means usually क्या होता था ज्यादातर कि जब भी गुस्सा आता था उनकी वाइफ को तो जो थॉम्सन एकदम शांत रहते थे. ठीक है, ज्यादा बात नहीं करते थे, कुछ बोलते नहीं थे अपनी वाइफ से. बट उस दिन क्या हुआ, इट वाज टू सम सरप्राइज दैट शी नाउ एनकाउंटर्ड अ फर्मली सेट काउंटेनेंस एंड अ रेजोल्यूट पेयर ऑफ आईज. बट उस दिन क्या हुआ, दैट ही स्पोक, उन्होंने बोला, ही रिप्लाइड टू हिज वाइफ एंड सो शी वाज साइलेंट. नाउ शी वाज लिसनिंग टू हिम. Joe saw by a quick intuition that his resolute bearing had impressed his wife, and he answered quickly and with real indignation, be that as it may, Every woman at the funeral turned her eyes steadily from the sick child's face, and when the cart went off with her dead mother, hurried away and left her alone in that old hut with the sun not an hour in the sky. So क्या हुआ कि अब जो थॉमसन ने नोटिस करा कि उसने जो उसका जो रेजोल्यूट बेयरिंग था, मतलब कि उसने जो रिप्लाई करा, ठीक है, इस तरह से बोला अपनी वाइफ को, उससे उसकी वाइफ इम्प्रेस हो गई है, मतलब थोड़ा शांत हो गई है. एंड तब वो उनको बताता है कि फ्यूनरल में वहां पे जितनी भी विमेन आई थी, ठीक है, वहां पे जितनी भी फीमेल्स आई थी, सबने वो बच्ची को देखा, और अभी तक मतलब देयर वाज नॉट एन विद द सन नॉट एन आवर इन द स्काई, मतलब कि अभी तक सन डूबा, मतलब सूरज डूबा भी नहीं था, कि वो सब वहां से चले गए उस बच्ची को वहीं पे छोड़ करके. सो दिस इज व्हाट ही इज एक्सप्लेनिंग टू हिज वाइफ. वेयर वर जॉन एंड केट, said asked Mrs. Thompson. तो मिसेस थॉमसन ने पूछा, where were John and Kate? जॉन और केट कहाँ गए? Farmer Jones tossed John into his wagon and drove off. Katie went home with Mrs. Ellis, but nobody wanted the poor sick one. Send her to the poorhouse was the cry. So he told कि Farmer Jones took John, Katie was taken by Mrs. Ellis, but nobody wanted to take Maggie. Why didn't you let her go then? What did you bring her here for? She can't walk to the poorhouse, said Joe. Somebody's arms must carry her, and mine are strong enough for the task. Then why didn't you keep on? Why did you stop here? Demanded the wife. Because I am not apt to go on fools' errands. The guardians must first be seen and a permit obtained. So now he says कि क्योंकि वो वहां चल के नहीं जा सकती है पुअर हाउस तक, इसलिए मैं उसको भी घर लेके आया हूँ. So her wife says that you could have taken her to the poor house straight. Even if she cannot walk, you can just lift her in your arms and you can take her to the poor house. So he says that I don't work, I'm not apt to go on fool's errands. Ma'am, doubt in Abu Ben Idem. Okay, we will cover that. I'll give you the schedule. Maybe tomorrow or day after tomorrow we are covering Abu Ben Idem. So you can just take the class. Alright, so he said that in order to take a child to the poor house, there must be the permission of the guardian. There must be a guardian, alright, and a permission also. So in order to get that, we need to keep Maggie here. I'll arrange for a guardian, I'll get the permit, and then I will take her to the poor house and leave her there. There was no gainsaying this. When will you see the guardians? Was asked with irrepressible impatience. Tomorrow. So now she was very impatient and she said, then when will you see the guardians? आप guardians को कब देखोगे? Means she wanted to get rid of this burden. So he says that tomorrow, alright, I will see the guardians tomorrow and I'll get the permission. Why put it off till tomorrow? Go at once for the permit and get the whole thing off of your hands tonight. So now she says कि अभी जाओ, कल के लिए क्यों इंतजार करना है, अभी जाओ, permit लेके आओ and leave her to the poor house. Jane said the wheelwright with an impressiveness of tone that greatly subdued his wife. I read in the Bible sometimes and find much said about little children. How the Savior rebuked the disciples who would not receive them, how he took them in his arms and blessed them, and how he said that whosoever gave them even a cup of cold water should not go unrewarded. Now it is a small thing for us to keep this poor motherless little one for a single night, to be kind to her for a single night and make her life comfortable for a single night. Alright, so now the wheelwriter Joe Thompson, he says to his wife, so the entire name, the full name of his wife was Jane Thompson. It was Mrs. Jane Thompson. Okay. So now he says that Jane, I read in the Bible sometimes and find much said about little children. मैं बहुत बार बाइबल में पढ़ता हूँ और बाइबल में छोटे बच्चों के बारे में बहुत कुछ लिखा हुआ है. Now the Savior rebuked the disciplines who would not receive them. How he took them in his arms and blessed them. And how he said that whosoever gave them even a cup of cold water should not go unrewarded. So he says कि किस तरह से बाइबल में बताया गया है कि जो हमारे सेवियर हैं उन्होंने बताया कि जो भी एक बच्चे को पानी भी पिलाता है अगर, ठीक है, somebody who is in need, a small child, even if you feed them, even if you give them water, then also you will be rewarded. तब भी you will get the rewards. And ये हमारे लिए तो छोटी सी चीज़ है कि हम ये एक poor motherless child है, उसको अपने घर में एक single night के लिए रख लें, for a single night, so that we can make her feel comfortable. The voice of the strong, rough man shook, and he turned his head away, so that the moisture in his eyes might not be seen. Mrs. Thompson did not answer, but a soft feeling crept into her heart. So now what happened? That the strong, rough man shook. Why? Because while saying this, he had tears in his eyes. He felt for the little child. Alright. So he just turned his face so that उनकी वाइफ को उनकी आँख में जो नमी है, उनकी आँख में जो आंसू आए हैं वो ना दिखे. Look at her kindly, Jane. Speak to her kindly, said Joe. Think of her dead mother and the loneliness, the pain, the sorrow that must be on all her coming life. The softness of his heart gave unwanted eloquence to his lips. Okay, so Mr. Joe Thompson, he says that look at her kindly, speak to her kindly, think of her dead mother. Okay, just think that her mother has just died yesterday, and just look at her. She's a poor little child. Speak to her, look at her kindly. Mrs. Thompson did not reply, but presently turned towards the little chamber where her husband has deposited Maggie, and pushing open the door, went quietly in. Joe did not follow. He saw that her state had changed, and felt that it would be best to leave her alone with the child. So he went to his shop, which stood near the house, and worked until dusky evening released him from labor. So now Mrs. Thompson did not reply to Joe Thompson. Okay. But what she did, that she just looked at the chamber. She opened the door and she went inside where Maggie was there. Now Joe Thompson didn't follow her. Okay. As he could see that there was something, in her eyes. He could see that there was some feeling for the child. He could see that after hearing his words. So when she went inside, he didn't follow her, and worked until dusky evening released him from labor. और शाम तक काम करके अब वो घर आए थे. Dusky evening मतलब जब सूरज डूबता है. So the dusk, that is the time. A little shining through the little chamber windows was the first object that attracted Joe's attention on turning towards the house. It was a good omen. The path led him by this windows, and when opposite, he could not help pausing to look in. It was now dark enough outside to screen him from observation. Maggie lay a little raised on the pillow with the lamp shining full upon her face. Mrs. Thompson was sitting by the bed, talking to the child. So now when he came back, alright, he could look from the window inside the chamber. So what he saw was that Maggie, she was lying down, alright, and Mrs. Joe Thompson, she was sitting beside her and she was having a conversation with Maggie. From Maggie's face, therefore, Joe must read the character of their intercourse. Means from Maggie's face, he could read what conversation they are having. Okay. He could know what kind of conversation they are having. Either she is scolding her, or either she is talking to her kindly. Whatever. he saw that her eyes were intently fixed upon his wife, that now and then a few words came, as if in answers from her lips, that her expression was sad and tender, but he saw nothing of bitterness or pain. A deep drawn breath was followed by one of relief as a weight lifted itself from his heart. So now he saw that her eyes were, the Maggie's eyes, they were fixed upon his wife, all right. And every now and then she was speaking some words. So while she was speaking out some words means that she was answering certain things which his wife was might be asking her. That her expression was sad and tender, but he saw nothing of bitterness or pain. All right. So now she was sad. All right. But there was no bitterness. There was no pain in her reactions, in her eyes. So because of that, Joe Thompson was now feeling, he got relief. कि ठीक है, whatever she is talking, she is not scolding her. She is not saying anything bad. Okay. On entering, Joe did not go immediately to the little chamber. His heavy tread about the kitchen brought his wife somewhat hurriedly from the room where he had been with Maggie. Joe thought it best not to refer to the child, nor to manifest any concern in regard to her. So now what happened? कि now when he entered the house, he didn't go to the chamber directly. ठीक है, वो सीधे chamber तक नहीं गया. His heavy tread about the kitchen brought his wife somewhat hurriedly from the room where she had been with Maggie. So when he was in the kitchen, तो वो सुनते ही उनकी वाइफ उनको देखते ही तुरंत जो है मैगी के रूम से नीचे आ गई. Joe thought it best not to refer to the child, nor to manifest any concern in regard to her. जो को ये लगा कि अभी उसको जो है कोई भी वो बच्चे के बारे में, मैगी के बारे में बात नहीं करनी चाहिए. How soon will supper be ready? He asked. तो उन्होंने पूछा अपनी वाइफ से कि supper means the dinner, the evening, whatever we eat in the evening, that's supper. So the food. So he asked that when will be the evening supper, when will be the food be ready? Right soon, answered Mrs. Thompson, beginning to bustle about. There was no asperity in her voice. So Mrs. Thompson says that right soon, बस अभी अभी तैयार हो जाएगा. After washing from his hands and face the dust and soil of work, Joe left the kitchen and went to the little bedroom. So now he washed his hands, all right, and he went to the bedroom. A pair of large bright eyes looked up at him from the snowy bed, looked at him tenderly, gratefully, pleadingly. How his heart swelled in his bosom. With what a quicker motion came the heartbeats. Joe sat down and now, for the first time, examining the thin free carefully under the lamplight, saw that it was an attractive face and full of a childish sweetness which suffering had not been able to obliterate. So means that when he went there, obviously Maggie was sitting there, she was looking at him, she was staring at him, and when he saw the face for the first time in the lamplight, he saw that it was a very innocent face. There was that childish look on her face, and it was full of childish sweetness. ठीक है, बच्चे बहुत भोले होते हैं, सीधे होते हैं, it is said, right? So वो जो childish sweetness होती है, वो जो भोलापन होता है, वो उनके फेस में था, वो उसके फेस में अभी भी था. even after all the suffering, उसने जो अपनी लाइफ में इतना ज्यादा सफर करा, उसके बाद भी वो childish sweetness उसके अंदर से जा नहीं पाई थी, वो उसके फेस से ही झलक रही थी. Your name is Maggie, he said, as he sat down and took her soft little hand in his. Yes, sir. Her voice struck a chord that quivered in a low strain of music. तो फिर तभी he asked Maggie, your name is Maggie, he said, as he sat down and took her soft hand, he took her hand in his hand. Alright, and while he was sitting there holding her hands, Maggie's hand, he asked her, your name is Maggie? So she replied, yes, sir. Have you been sick long? Yes, sir. What a sweet patience was in her voice. So he is questioning him and she is answering. Has the doctor been to see you? He used to come. But not lately. No, sir. Have you any pain? Ma'am, please tell the meaning of death touches the spring of our common humanity. Death touches the spring of our common humanity. It basically means that the death of her mother, मतलब कि the common humanity, मतलब आस पास के जितने लोग थे, ठीक है, जो उसको इतना बुरा भला बोलते थे, जो उसको इतना मॉक करते थे, ultimately when she dies, ठीक है, जब वो मर गई, so it touches द स्प्रिंग ऑफ अ कॉमन ह्यूमैनिटी, मतलब हमारे अंदर जो ह्यूमैनिटी होती है, ठीक है, वो जग गई. आसपास के लोगों के अंदर की जो ह्यूमैनिटी थी वो उनके लिए जग गई, उनके बच्चों के लिए जग गई. दैट ऑलराइट, इट इज सेड ना दैट sorrow, you know, it turned the denunciation, it turned into sorrow. So there was pity. So it means that ultimately when a person dies, ठीक है, जब कोई जिंदा रहता है तब तो इंसान बहुत बुरा भला बोलता है, लेकिन जब किसी की डेथ हो जाती है तो उसके बाद वही सब चीजें ऑपोजिट हो जाती हैं एकदम, ठीक है. उसके बारे में नेगेटिविटी, किसी के मरने के बाद इंसान की अच्छाइयाँ करी जाती हैं, उसकी नेगेटिविटीज को नेग्लेक्ट कर दिया जाता है. सो दैट इज व्हाट दे आर ट्राइंग टू से. I hope it's clear. If you have any doubt, you can tell me in the comment section again. The little match girl. No, okay, he has deleted the message, but this is not the little match girl. Okay, the little match girl was a different story where, you know, she was selling the matchsticks and then she died ultimately. That's a different story. He used to come, but not lately. No, sir. Have you any pain? Sometimes, but not now. So this is the question answer round, just going between Joe Thompson and Maggie, right? When had you pain? This morning, my side ached and my back hurt when you carried me. So he asks, कि when had you pain? मतलब the last time, when did you feel the pain? So she says कि when you had picked me up today in the morning in your arms, my side ached. मतलब मेरे side में it was paining. Ached means pain. And my back hurt. And मेरी पीठ में भी, मेरे back में भी दर्द हो रहा था. It hurts you to be lifted or moved about. Yes, sir. So he asked कि अच्छा तुमको लिफ्ट करा जाए या तुमको इधर से उधर लेके जाया जाए या मूव करा जाए तो तुम्हें दर्द होता है. So she says, yes, sir. Your side doesn't ache now. No, sir. Does it ache a great deal? Yes, sir, but it hasn't ached any since I've been on the soft bed. The soft bed feels good. Oh, yes, sir, so good. What a satisfaction mingled with gratitude was in her voice. Means he says कि अच्छा तुम्हें बहुत ज़्यादा दर्द होता है. तो बोलती yes sir, दर्द तो मुझे बहुत ज़्यादा होता है, लेकिन जब से ना मैं इस सॉफ्ट बेड पे लेटी हूँ मुझे कोई पेन नहीं हो रहा है. ठीक है, तो वो बोलता है कि अच्छा तो क्या बेड बहुत ज़्यादा सॉफ्ट है? तो she says yes sir, because all her life she never got it. राइट, अपनी पूरी जिंदगी उसने सफरिंग्स देखी हैं, प्रॉब्लम्स देखी हैं, उसको कभी अच्छी चीज़ें मिली ही नहीं. So now when she got it, she felt very good. Supper is ready, said Mrs. Thompson, looking into the room a little while afterwards. तभी जो है मिसेस थॉमसन उस रूम में झाँक के बोलती हैं, सपर इज रेडी, खाना तैयार है. Joe glanced from his wife's face to that of Maggie. She understood him and answered. So now what happened कि जो ने अपनी वाइफ की तरफ देखा और फिर मैगी की तरफ पॉइंट आउट करा, मतलब अपनी वाइफ को इशारा करा कि हमें पहले मैगी को खाना देना चाहिए. Okay? She can wait until we are done. Then I will bring her some things to eat. There was an effort at indifference on the part of Mrs. Thompson, but her husband had seen her through the window and understood that the coldness was assumed. Joe waited, after sitting down to the table, for his wife to introduce the subject uppermost in both of their thoughts. But she kept silent on that theme for many minutes, and he maintained a like reserve At last, she said abruptly. She can wait until we are done. So when he says that we should, you should serve the supper to Maggie as well. So she says कि जब तक हम लोग खाने लेते तब तक वो वेट कर सकती है. जब हमारा खाना खत्म हो जाएगा उसके बाद we can give her the food to eat. So now Mr. Thompson जो थे उन्होंने अपनी वाइफ को विंडो से वो ऑलरेडी अज्यूम कर चुके थे. ठीक है. So now he is saying, it is said कि वो जो कोल्डनेस थी, ठीक है, that coldness in Mrs. Thompson, that was all assumed. वो केवल एक दिखावा था. ठीक है, वो अपने हस्बैंड के सामने दिखावा कर रही थी of being cold. What are you going to do with that child? I thought you understood me that she was to go to the poorhouse, replied Joe, as if surprised at her question. तो अब क्या हुआ कि वाइफ ने, मिस जेन थॉमसन ने अपने हस्बैंड से पूछा कि अच्छा कि तो तुम उस बच्चे के साथ क्या करने वाले हो, व्हाट आर यू गोइंग टू डू विद मैगी. ठीक है, तो जो बोलता है कि आई थिंक यू अंडरस्टूड कि उसको हमें अनाथ आश्रम भेजना है, वी हैव टू सेंड हर टू द पुअर हाउस. Mrs. Thompson looked rather strangely at her husband for sonic moments and then dropped her eyes. The subject was not again referred to during the meal. At its close, Mrs. Thompson toasted a slice of bread and softened it with milk and butter. Adding to this a cup of tea, she took them into Maggie and held the small waiter on which she had placed them while the hungry child ate every single sign of pleasure. So now, on the dinner table, they didn't had that conversation again. ठीक है, मिसेस थॉमसन ने ये चीज़ पूछ के अपनी आंखें नीचे कर ली एंड उसके बाद वो बात तब तक नहीं हुई जब तक दे वर सिटिंग ऑन द डिनर टेबल. फिर मिसेस थॉमसन ने ब्रेड टोस्ट करी. मिसेस थॉमसन टोस्टेड अ स्लाइस ऑफ ब्रेड, ठीक है, एंड शी सॉफ्टेंड इट विद मिल्क एंड बटर, मीन शी हैड पुट मिल्क एंड बटर ऑन इट. ऑलराइट, एडिंग टू दिस अ कप ऑफ टी, और एक कप ऑफ टी रखा, ठीक है, वेटर पे रखा एंड देन शी टुक इट टू मैगी. मैगी के चेम्बर में लेके गई जहाँ पे उसने शी एट एवरी साइन ऑफ प्लेजर, मीन शी एट द एंटायर फूड. इज इट गुड? आस्क्ड मिसेस थॉमसन, सीइंग विद व्हाट अ कीन रिलिश द फूड वाज टेकन. मिसेस थॉमसन देखती हैं कि भाई उसको इतनी खुशी हुई फूड देख के एंड उसने इतने खुशी से वो फूड खाया है, वो खाना खत्म करा है. तो उन्होंने पूछा मैगी से, इज इट गुड? The child paused with the cup in her hand and answered with a look of gratitude that awoke to her new life old human feelings which had been slumbering in her heart for half a score of years. Alright, so now what happens that she was sipping the tea, ठीक है, और तभी मैगी रुक जाती है एंड तभी वो मिसेस थॉमसन की तरफ देखती है एंड तभी मिसेस थॉमसन के अंदर वो फीलिंग्स, एक ह्यूमन फीलिंग्स एक जग उठती है जो कि बहुत सालों से उनके अंदर मर चुकी थी बेसिकली. विल कीप हर अ डे और टू लॉन्गर, शी इज सो वीक एंड हेल्पलेस, सेड मिसेस जो थॉमसन in answer to her husband's remark at breakfast time on the next morning that he must step down and see the guardians of the poor about Maggie. She'll be so much in your way, said Joe. I shouldn't mind that for a day or two, poor thing. So now the next morning, Joe said on the breakfast table, Joe ने बोला, Joe Thompson ने, कि now I should go and look for the guardian, for the poor thing. Means I should go and look for the guardians कि हम लोग उसको poor house भेज पाए. तो उस पर मिसेस जो थॉमसन ने रिप्लाई करा दैट आई वुड लाइक टू कीप हर फॉर 1 or 2 days मोर. हम उसको 1 या 2 दिन और रख सकते हैं बिकॉज शी इज़ वेरी वीक एंड शी नीड्स केयर. ओके, तो जो बोलता है बट शी विल बी इन योर वे, मतलब तुम्हें बहुत दिक्कत होगी उससे. सो शी सेज ओ नो आई शुडंट माइंड दैट फॉर अ डे और 2, पुअर थिंग. सो शी सेज दैट नो, शी इज़ वेरी हेल्पलेस, शी इज़ अ पुअर थिंग एंड 1 या 2 दिन में मुझे इतनी दिक्कत नहीं होगी, सो आई वुड लाइक टू कीप हर. Joe did not see the guardians of the poor on that day, on the next, nor on the day following. In fact, he never saw them at all on Maggie's account. For in less than a week, Mrs. Joe Thompson would as soon leave thought of taking up her own abode in the almshouse as sending Maggie there. All right. So now what happened that Joe never had to see guardians for Maggie. Why? Because Mrs. Joe Thompson decided कि वो मैगी को अपने पास हमेशा रखेंगी. So जो थॉमसन को तो ऑलरेडी मैगी पसंद थी, मिसेस थॉमसन को भी पसंद आ गई, and now they had her as their own child. She used to, pick her up in her own arms whenever she had to go anywhere. She treated her like a mother. They were already childless. All right, and because of that, she had that feelings. The feelings of motherhood had almost died in Mrs. Thompson, and so she had become rude. ठीक है, इसी वजह से वो इतना rude हो चुकी थी because she was childless. What light and blessing did that sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson, the poor wheelwright? It had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time, just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself, and so became sore, irritable, ill-tempered, and self-afflicting in the desolation of a woman's nature. Means क्या हुआ? What light and blessing did that sick and helpless child bring to the home of Joe Thompson? मतलब वो एक sick और helpless child जब से वो घर आई थी तो it came out to be a blessing. ठीक है, तो वो it turned out to be a blessing. Why? Because it had been dark and cold and miserable there for a long time. उनके घर में it had been dark and cold and miserable means that there had been no feelings there, means there had been a lot of cruelty, a lot of rudeness, a lot of anger, all right, in their house from a very long time, just because his wife had nothing to love and care for out of herself. क्यों? क्योंकि उसकी वाइफ के पास और किसी को प्यार करने के लिए या और कोई था ही नहीं जिसको वो प्यार करे, जिसकी वो केयर करे, एक्सेप्ट फॉर हरसेल्फ, अपने अलावा. And so became sore, irritable, ill-tempered and self-afflicting in the desolation of her woman's nature. And इसी वजह से वो एकदम सार, irritated रहती थी. ill-tempered मतलब बहुत ज़्यादा गुस्से वाली हो गई थी. ठीक है, जो कि एक वुमन के अंदर बेसिकली नहीं होता है, जो कि एक वुमन के नेचर में नहीं होता है. बट इफ अ वुमन इज डिप्राइव्ड ऑफ लव एंड केयर देन इट माइट हैपन, राइट? Now the sweetness of that sick child, looking ever to her in love, patience and gratitude, was as honey to her soul, and she carried her in her heart as well as in her arms, a precious burden. अब जब वो बच्ची, when Maggie, she used to look at her, so there was that love, there was that patience, ठीक है, there was that gratitude, हर चीज़ वो बहुत प्यार से उनकी तरफ देखती थी, and वो एक look ही उनके लिए काफ़ी होता था. ठीक है, and जिसकी वजह से she had Mrs. Joe Thompson carried Maggie not only in her arms but also in her heart. Means Maggie उनके दिल में बस गई थी. Means Maggie, she used to treat Maggie as her own child. As for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all the neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. An angel had come into his house, disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, and filled all its dreary chambers with the sunshine of love. So now, Joe Thompson, there was not, now according to Joe Thompson, ठीक है, आसपास there was no man in the neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. मतलब कि वो अपनी लाइफ को जितनी खुशी से जी रहे थे, ठीक है, एंड उनका जो एक रेगुलर उनके घर में जो एक खुशी आ गई थी, उनसे ज़्यादा खुश और कोई इंसान नहीं होगा उनके नेबरहुड में. An angel had come into his house, disguised as a sick, helpless, and miserable child, and filled all its dreary chambers with the sunshine of love. Means उनके घर में एक बेसिकली एक एंजल आ गई थी, ठीक है, और उसने उनके घर को एकदम it was filled with the sunshine of love, मतलब उनके घर को खुशियों से भर दिया था. This is entirely an answer, you can say. Why was she a precious burden? So now if I ask you the question that Why is Maggie considered as a precious burden in the story? So what will be your answer? Write it down in the comment section. I want the answer. Anybody can tell the answer? So this is your last paragraph. You have the answer here only. Why was she a precious burden? Okay. She brought love and care. She changed Jane Thompson's behavior. Okay, she brought love and care and she changed. All right, very nice. All right, you have given the main points. Because due to Maggie, his wife's bad temper changed into a sweet temper. All right, okay. This is also a point. Because she changed Jane Thompson's behavior. All right, she turned out to be sweet. So now, when you will get this answer, you can get it in long answers as well. All right. So this.
Ma'am, his wife vinegar's temper changed into a sweet, calm temper.
Sorry, I couldn't get you.
Ma'am, his wife vinegar temper changed into a calm, soothing temper.
Oh, all right. Very nice. Again, this is also correct because the wife's temper changed. She brought about happiness into the lives of childless couple by giving them a reason to love and care for Mrs. Thompson. All right. Very good. Very nice. So all of you have given the correct answer. She was a precious burden because she brought happiness into lives of childless couple. Very nice. So everyone has given the answer, and basically all of you, all right, all the points given by you, they will be compiled and one single answer will be formed. All right. So this is your answer. If you have to write it in long answers, so this will be your answer basically. That because she brought light and a blessing to Joe Thompson's house. All right. It had been dark and cold and miserable for a long time because his wife had nothing to love and care about except for herself.
Ma'am, why was she referred as a burden here?
Sorry, where?
Ma'am, why was she referred as a burden here? It's written
All
a
right.
precious
Why
burden.
was she considered a burden? She was considered a burden because her spine had broken. Right? She had fallen down. When you will write the answer, you will write down that 2 years back she had fallen down from a window and her spine has been injured. She was bedridden and couldn't get off the bed by herself. Except when, lifted in the arms of her mother. So she was considered a burden.
Ma'am, excuse me, ma'am. Ma'am, what is precious wine is referred to here in this paragraph?
Precious
wine.
Portable. Okay, just a minute. Let me check. Here. As for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all the neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. Means precious wine of life means that happiness. All right, precious wine means something very expensive. All right, something very expensive. And what could be more expensive than happiness? All right, so he says that there was nobody in the entire neighborhood who could be more happier than Joe Thompson. All right, or who lived better than Joe Thompson. So precious wines means basically precious means something very precious wine means something very expensive, and happiness is it basically refers to happiness here.
Ma'am, here precious wine is Maggie. Ma'am, here the precious wine is Maggie.
No, precious wine is not Maggie. Here Joe Thompson is saying, okay, that as for Joe Thompson, there was not a man in all the neighborhood who drank daily of a more precious wine of life than he. Means he says कि for Joe Thompson there was nobody else in the neighborhood. ठीक है, सारे neighbors में और कोई भी नहीं था who drank daily, मतलब जो कि रोज डेली इतनी प्रेशियस वाइन, इतनी एक्सपेंसिव वाइन पी सके, मतलब जो कि रोज जिसको इतनी खुशियां मिल सके, जो कि रोज इतना खुश रह सके, who can have so much of happiness. Alright, so precious wine is not referred to anybody here. Here Joe Thompson is just telling that he is happy. And he is happier than everybody in the neighborhood. How can we say that only Maggie was an angel in disguise in the story? Even Mrs. Thompson could be the angel in disguise for Maggie's thoughts. See, you can say that Mrs. Thompson was an angel for Maggie, alright, but not an angel in disguise. Why? Because Mrs. Thompson, she had her hands and legs working, she had her husband, she has an entire family, she has a home, right? But if we talk about Maggie, so Maggie, she was a poor, helpless child, alright, she was bedridden, she couldn't get up, she couldn't do anything by herself. And when she came to Mr. Joe Thompson's house, her wife wasn't ready to keep the child. But in a day or two, उनकी वाइफ के नेचर में इतने ज़्यादा चेंजेस आ गए, and इस वजह से she is referred as an angel in disguise. For Maggie, Jane Thompson can be an angel. Alright, why? Because now she got a home and a much better life than before. Because Maggie had a change in Jane's life as a soft feeling had crept in Jane's heart. She also brought the old human feelings of Jane's which had not been seen for years. Even Mr. Thompson can be the angel but not in disguise. Right. You're correct. Even Mr. Thompson can be an angel but obviously not an angel in disguise. If it is asked who's the angel in disguise, you have undoubtedly to write Maggie. Okay. Ma'am, what to do in English literature? How to write answers? And ma'am, for board examination, how to write answers and how to prepare English literature and language too. See, the main thing is your workbook, the Morning Star. Alright, English literature ICSE covers 60 to 70% of its paper from the workbooks. You need to know the themes, you need to know the critical appreciation and the MCQs and the long and short question answers from your workbook mainly. Now, when it is just a few days left for your exam, you should rely on your workbook. Here, I am giving you the explanation. I will also give you the question answers, the MCQs, along with all the question answers, and also the extra questions will be sent to you. Okay. Oh, I've seen that. None. Ma'am, can we have the blue bead in the next class, please? Blue bead, see, for the next 6 days, we are going to have the English class. Alright, one story and one poem every day, and we'll cover each story and each poem. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it. Even if not in the next class, it will be taken in the next for sure. On 13th, like tomorrow, we'll have the Little Match Girl and Daffodils. And 14th, we'll have the Blue Bead. 14th of February means day after tomorrow, we'll have the Blue Bead and the Patriot. Then 15th, we'll have My Greatest Olympic Prize and Abu Ben Adhem. 16th February, it's All Summer in a Day, 9 gold medals. And 17th February, we'll have Merchant of Venice discussion. Alright, the question answers, your doubts, you can keep. We will have a discussion about it. And tenses and prepositions. So your entire course will be, a revision of the entire course will be done in these 6 days. Even if workbook nahi milti hai, so I will send you the question and answers. I will send you the entire PDF. which will have the workbook, question and answers both.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, so everyone is clear with the chapter?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is it for today. You will also get the video for the I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. All right. Or maybe we'll discuss it tomorrow. I'll send you the PDF. I'll send you the PDF for I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings as well. You have to know, you have to learn the question answers so that we can have a discussion tomorrow. Okay, so this is your English teacher Muskan Shukla signing off. Thank you.
मैम क्वेश्चन आंसर्स किधर भेजोगे आप?
On your group.
ओके, थैंक यू.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Recording stopped.
नहीं बस